This is Patrick Russell. I'm interviewing Jack Taylor for the first time. This interview is taking place on July 22nd, 2021 in American Falls. This interview is being conducted by the Making History Project. How you doing, Jack?
Good.
All right. So tell me, when were you born?
November 12th, 1928.
And where were you born?
Idaho Falls, Idaho.
All right. And tell me a little bit about what Idaho Falls was like when you were growing up.
It was more or less a small town. And it's now got the INEL site out there, atomic energy site, was brought into there. And it's grown tremendously since then. It was, when I was a young man, it was 10,000 people. I think it's well over 50,000, maybe more. With suburbs like Hammond and so on, there's much more than that. But I can't give you a definite count.
And how big was your family?
I have my peers. I had 3 sisters and 3 brothers. 2 brothers, excuse me, there's 3 of each.
All right, and what did your parents do?
My father was a farmer. He was into politics as well. He was a county commissioner. He was a state representative. Also, he served as a street commissioner in Idaho Falls.
And tell me a little bit about the farm. What type of farm was it?
Well, it was a potato farm originally. Still is, I guess. And anyway, my grandfather homesteaded in the Ammon area, and he moved onto this farm, which was a few miles to the west of it, and he took it up. It was an 80-acre farm, a premier farm of all the area, and they grew potatoes. In fact, they grew several different kinds of crops trying to make a living there. It was in the early days, in the late 1800s, excuse me. And my grandfather ran away from home when he was 16 years old and homesteaded there. From that point on, he was trying to make a living, and when he was first married, they lived in what they call a dugout or a sod roof house. It was the only one in the country that had water built in, because when it rained, water was in the house for 3 days afterwards, through the roof, of course. But anyway, he was one of the first, or was the first, I have data proving it, to build a potato cellar to store potatoes. When potatoes first come to Idaho, he became what was Potato King of Idaho. And he had several acres. They told me 300, but I doubt that very much of the kind of equipment they had to do it with. But when they did raise potatoes, they had to do it in such a way that they could have them all sold at digging time. In other words, they had no place to go with them. When the frost hit, they was all damaged so bad they couldn't use them. So he developed what they call a potato cellar. And this is a picture of my father, the way they hauled the potatoes in a wagon.
Can you lift it up a little bit? Just hold it there. A little higher? Okay, perfect.
And he was 16 years old at the time, driving a 6-horse team. And in this potato cellars that they first built, he designed them so they could drive this team and wagon over the top of the cellar and dump them in from the top, because there was no electricity at that time to do anything other than that. So in any case, by building those potato cellars, he was the first to do so. They were able to store their potatoes for an extended time through the spring, and made the market so it was more accessible and more lucrative. And so in that case, from that point on, everybody started building potato cellars to take advantage of markets. Anyway, there's a monument on that farm today depicting what they did. It's in Idaho Falls, Idaho. And it was put up by the Sons of the Utah Pioneers, telling all the story of what it was. But it was struggle all the way through. They had no irrigation canals, no ditches, no nothing to irrigate. They had to create ways to get water to the farm by themselves. And so that's that answer to that so far.
Where did your grandfather come from before he came out here?
Utah, they called it Far West Utah, just out of Ogden.
Okay.
And he ran, like I say, he ran away from home at 16 and come up here trying to make a hit for himself, which he did, I guess.
And did you work on that farm when you were growing up?
I bought the farm from my father. It passed down, and eventually I sold it to the LDS Church. And I got an enormous price for it. But that farm today, where it's located, is worth, probably 10 times more than I got for it. Not complaining, it was a deal's a deal. Then that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. So did you go to high school?
Yes.
And graduated?
From Shelley High School.
All right. Did you play any sports or have any hobbies in high school?
I took up boxing and football. And boxing wasn't my favorite. My coach told me, he says, you better learn how to run fast. He says, because fighters run in your family, so to speak. He meant get away from somebody. Anyway, he was a good coach. He had a Gold Glove Championship badge on his chest at all times. Anyway, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. And so what did you do after high school?
I went to farming when I was 19 years old. I rented a farm from my dad on a partnership basis. It was a fiasco the first 2 or 3 years. I didn't do very well, but I stuck with it until I got drafted. And I had to hire somebody to take my place, and I had to pay him more than I was receiving when I was drafted, which I'd do again if I had to, because I still think that much of my country.
So what was a typical day like for you when you're struggling with your farm at age 19?
Well, in the summertime, 12 hours was minimum. Sometimes you get up during the night to change water. You might be up all times of the night. It just depended. Baling hay. You had a lot of extra hours, any amount you wanted to put in. Working for yourself, you could do what you wanted to do. So we worked hard. In the wintertime, I took jobs off the farm to support myself, because small farms at that time, most farmers did the same thing. Worked in potato warehouses, sorting potatoes, scooping potatoes. I scooped potatoes for one outfit for 6 years. We handled over 1 million sacks a year that I scooped for them.
And what's scooping?
It's a machine that goes under the potatoes. It's in a pile. They're piled in the cellar. It automatically, the potatoes roll up on the belt. And it's got an extended conveyor system that goes right into the piler and loads trucks. So before the advent of that, we used to scoop by hand. And that's what's my problem partly now. My back, we tried to show off and see how good we could do. I got a real attaboy time from my boss. I was a crew chief, and two other guys and myself and 2 truck drivers scooped 21 loads a day, which is about 3,000 sacks. And the next morning he prepared to tell me how he would scoop if it was him, and I thought, you know, I don't need any more information on that. I think I could pass that school.
And so you were drafted into the U.S. Army?
Yes.
In what year?
1953. I took my physical in the spring. I got a deferment to get my crop out till November of '53. I was inducted.
And this is for the Korean War?
Yes.
And how did your family feel about you being drafted?
Well,
The
he
Korean
didn't
War?
like the idea, but my dad was patriotic, and he says, if you have to serve, you got to go. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. My brother served in, he was taken out of college with a good, he had a good score, scholastically he was high, but they took him out of college and put him in the service, Army Air Force at that time. Anyway, he's buried at Arlington, by the way.
What's your brother's name?
Joseph Allen.
Okay. And he served in World War II.
Yes.
All right. And how did you feel about being drafted?
Well, he was upset too, but like he was brought up with the same philosophy: either serve or you're not patriotic. One of the two.
Mm-hmm. So how did you feel about being drafted?
Same way. All my buddies was going in. I was single. I felt I should take my part too.
And were you aware of what was going on in Korea at the time you got drafted?
Yes.
Okay. And so you went into the U.S. Army, and where was your basic training?
Basic training was San Luis Obispo, California.
And how long was that?
It was we had 8 weeks of basic training, which is Army. Then we had our schooling of 14 weeks, power maintenance school.
Okay, so how was your 8 weeks of basic training?
It was typical, but it was nothing like combat. Everybody I've talked to in combat said it wouldn't even come close to what they had to go through.
Well, after scooping 21 trucks a day, potatoes, was basic training that hard for you?
No.
Okay. And what do you remember the most about basic training?
Well, at Thanksgiving time, which was just shortly after my induction, I was at San Luis Obispo and I got a telephone call from the orderly room. It was my father telling my brother was drowned at Lorenzo, Idaho in the river, and his funeral was to be had soon, so I got emergency leave to the Red Cross to come home to that.
Okay.
Otherwise it was a piece of cake.
Yeah. All right, in terms of basic training, can you tell me a little bit of what you did during basic training?
Well, it's just the normal thing. You taught you everything that they could in 8 weeks. You had, I got my book here, of course, it's got it all in, but we, first of all, we got all our shots and all such stuff as that. We got everything to go with it. We were billeted in little bunkhouses, I called them, 5-man shacks, 5 men to a shack, no bathroom facilities, and room for foot lockers and a wall locker. That's all you had, and your clothes, of course. And then we marched to school every morning, 8 abreast. I think there was about 5,000 in the group. We'd peel off at each segment. If you was at power maintenance, you'd go that one direction, you just peel off. So on, radio, teletype, radio, so on, telephones, all such MOSs that existed at that time. But that's where we started, and in our basic training it was just the normal things that happen. It's just marching to the beat of the drum, I guess you'd say. Do what they tell you to do. When they say so much, you bow down and do it. Push-ups if you don't. It was fun.
Did you get qualified in any particular equipment or weapons?
I was qualified in the power maintenance department, which was we had to connect several different power units together on a bus bar. In other words, we had to synchronize it to the bus bar so they all run together, create electricity enough to run a city if we had to. They were all big engines. We were taught to overhaul them and tear them down if need be. And in 14 weeks, we had an extensive schooling. It was 8 hours a day. And boy, I'll tell you, they really drove it to you. And I learned a lot. I had quite a bit of mechanic skills prior to that, but I learned more there. One thing I do remember, the instructor was a real solid mechanic. They were civilians. And he issued each one of us a toolbox, and every one of the toolbox had a crescent wrench in it. And if he ever saw us pick that up to turn a nut or a bolt, immediately we got a DR, or in other words, delinquency report. And you might got kicked out of the school if we caught you using it. Because when you use a crescent wrench, you round off the bolts. And in other words, they didn't want them engines to be any defects that way. So that was just another story.
What's a bus bar?
That's a common bar that each engine has its electrical connections up to it, and you have to synchronize to that bus bar with each engine. In other words, they have a dial indicator that tells you what cycle you're on, how many cycles you are, and the minute that the dial reaches a certain point, you have to engage your engine to that bus bar. In other words, it just puts all 4 units, or 5, I don't know how many, in conjunction with one another that create the power needed to do whatever they have to do.
So you were operating generators?
Yes.
All right, and engines, are they diesel?
Diesel engines, yeah, anything range from Cummins to all kinds, GMCs, anything they had.
Is this type of work something you requested, or they just decided that you would be a good fit for that?
That was what I was assigned. I didn't have any choice in it. That's what they took interviews from you to begin with, and they put you in certain areas they thought you'd excel in, so that's what I did.
All right, and what would be your typical training for during that period, your advanced training?
Tearing down engines, solving problems. They created problems with the engines. In other words, the air cleaners, if you wasn't sharp, you couldn't figure it out, but they'd take the air cleaner and put a cardboard box in between the segments to shut off the air completely. And some of us guys had cranked those engines over so much we thought they was going to boil the water in the radiator before they started. We never did get them started because they didn't have any air. And so we had to learn how to adapt to that. They find out the problems. We had to. They kind of jigged us a little bit, but they wouldn't tell us what they were doing. But we found out afterwards that they were pretty sharp.
So they would try to simulate different problems.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And you'd have to figure out what it
You'd have
was.
to figure out what it was.
Troubleshooting.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Right. And did you have to do any type of like mill work and create parts?
No, we didn't do no machinists. No, just mechanical.
And what was your highest rank in the military?
Corporal.
And did you eventually deploy overseas?
Yes.
And where did you go?
We landed in Yokohama, Japan. Is where destination was.
And how did you get there?
By boat.
And
I call it a slow boat to China. There was 5,000 men on board, plus the Navy, which was about 12 to 1,500 personnel. And it took us 21 days to get to Japan from Pier 9 in San Francisco.
What type of a ship was it?
It was a troop ship called USS Mann.
MANN?
Yes.
So you took 21 days. So what are you doing on 21 days on the open seas?
That's what we'd like to know. No, it was slow, but we got to where we thought we was hitting land. The birds of the area were coming to seed. Everybody says, well, we're going to see land pretty soon. We all expected to see Japan. As we got closer, found out it was Formosa. And at that time, military people with sergeant or better rank could have cars overseas. Out of the whole of that ship, with all the men we had on board, they unloaded 100 cars on the deck, or on the shore. The people on the Formosa people come on board, took charge of unloading them, setting them down. It was fun to watch on a hot deck. I think the kitchen on the boat that day was 117 degrees. Nobody went to lunch, of course. But we sit on a hot deck, and if you moved for 5 minutes, you could fry an egg on it.
And while you're on the troop ship for 21 days, what kind of things are you doing on the ship?
Just conversing and goofing around and playing Monopoly or anything we could do to find time to pass.
Did you get seasick?
What's that?
Did you get seasick?
I didn't, but some did.
Anything memorable on that 21-day journey besides Formosa?
Okinawa. We lived there next. And that was a very solemn occasion. As we sailed into Okinawa, there was sunken ships everywhere from the Second World War still there. And it was shallow port. But anyway, as we sailed in, we could look off in the distance and see nothing but white crosses. And buried there was some of the 17,000 men that was killed on the Battle of Okinawa. And when we went past that, you could hear a pin drop on that ship. There wasn't a word one said anybody. It just was at awe. Of course, we wasn't allowed to disembark at all. We had to stay right on board.
And then where did you go from there?
We then finally went to Japan. Landed in Okinawa on July 4th, 1953. 1954. Oh, wait a minute, 53, yeah, 53. So I hope I got my dates right, because it's hard to remember some of this stuff.
All right, so you disembark in Okinawa?
No, not at Okinawa, at Yokohama.
Yokohama, okay. So on July 4th, you're in Yokohama, you disembark. What do you end up doing?
Well, we went to Camp Tokyo, which is nearby, and at that time, the Japanese were putting on a display, fireworks display, that evening, and they had depicted there the Statue of Liberty. I don't know how many stories high it was, but they had lit that up like you wouldn't believe, and it was the most exorbitant thing I ever seen for fireworks.
I was going to ask you about fireworks. I just didn't think they would have them, but they did. Okay. Did you interact with any of the Japanese civilians or military people?
Very much so.
Yeah. And how were they?
They were hard to read. We, of course, didn't understand Japanese, but they did understand some English, because a lot of the school kids at that time were taking English. And I talked to a missionary, one of my friends, went on a mission over there for a church. He said, you had more interaction with the Japanese than I did, because we lived in a city. We lived in a billet, kind of like it was one of the best houses in Hakodate, whereas the people was all around us. We lived right in the middle of the city. I think it was close to 500,000 people there. And I like to interact with the children, especially. I got moving pictures of it. And they were good to us. We had a houseboy, Mama-san that took care of all the laundry. We didn't have to do anything. Never stood inspection. So I had a picnic compared to most soldiers. But we had a duty to perform, and I learned a lot.
And so what was the name of your base?
It was an outpost. Didn't have any name in particular, just it It was a division of the 8174th Signal Corps. And that's what our duty was, to send and receive messages. We had a clearance, of course. All of us had to have clearances. They even took the liberty of coming home and interviewing people in our hometowns to find our past background. And if you didn't pass, you didn't go there.
Why was that? Why was your background necessary?
Because you had to handle secret material on the radio. And everything had to be coded and run through what they call a encrypting machine that was set up in such a way monthly you had to change all the lug settings in it. And once you put your message through that machine, it'd come out in 5-letter groups. And that was your messages you sent in 5-letter groups.
Now, how did you go from working on generators to communications?
Well, first of all, there was a shortage of radio operators. They couldn't get enough to supply because they had to have 24/7 communications to every 30 minutes to the 1st Cavalry Division, which was 150 miles away at Sapporo. And if we had 3 types of communication: radio, teletype, voice, and then of course CW, which is Morse code. And you had to, most of it was sent by Morse code, so that it was done so because the enemy can't get fixes on Morse code like they can radio teletype. You don't have a wide band like teletype does. I hope you can understand where I'm coming from. Anyway, it was unique. I didn't know anything about it, but my first sergeant come to me one day and says, "Taylor, you're going to be a radio operator." And I says, "That's a laugh." I says, "I can't even play the radio, let alone get on it." And he said, "Well, I'm going to teach you." So they bought an oscillator for me between them, and then I don't know how long it took, but it wasn't very long till I had down pretty good, till they put me on duty. I could send and receive 20 words a minute.
And at this point, who are you associated with? So it was the 1st Cavalry?
Yes.
All right, and it was the...
We were a detachment from there.
And you said it was the 8174 Signal Corps?
Yep.
Okay. And so, doing your work now as a radio operator, describe that for me. Like, who are you working with? How big is this room? What are you using?
It was a typical house. For them it wasn't typical, but for us it would be here. It was large and had a rock wall around it, clear around it. It was fenced in, secure. We had our own vehicle to go to and from Chow. We ate with CIA. They were built in a big building there, and they were top secret. We couldn't even go into their workplace at all because we didn't have that good clearance. But while we was on duty, we had the permission to copy Peking Press. We got a daily news from China about America. Can you believe that? And that's how we come out in big tapes on the machine, on the teletype machine.
And tell me about the equipment that you're using and how it works.
We had a BC-10 transmitter, plus 2 teletype machines, 2 receivers, a TD machine. We had a encrypting machine, and you had to learn all that. There was 76 presettings to put that radio on board before you could communicate. Of course, you didn't have to go through all 76, but if you put Teletalk, for example, you had to coordinate with the main station to get the right, what they call mark and space, so that it was synchronized. I'm telling you, this is 50 years afterwards, so don't expect the best.
And how many people are you working with in this house?
There was probably, operators all together with, they had the repairman, teletype repairman, we had about 8 of us all together. Each had our own room.
And what were you doing specifically?
I was, when I was on duty, I was sending messages and receiving messages.
On any of those machines that you just talked about? Or one specific?
mostly CW, Morse code. I still have a key in there.
And you actually did the little clicks?
Yep.
Oh yeah? So you're a Morse code expert.
Not an expert, not by any sense of the word. I thought I was good until I talked to one of the guys come down and he was copying PK Press by code, coming in clear text, excuse me. He was doing 40 words a minute. And he stopped and lit a cigarette, got back on board, caught right back up.
Wow.
He was in the Merchant Marines. And those guys could really do good. They were good.
And what type of messaging are you being involved with?
Well, just common things. They weren't necessarily had to be coded, but we had to code everything. And for example, the first sergeant, the master sergeant in charge at the NCS, they called it. That was the main headquarters. It's Sapporo. They'd send messages down. What's your supply needs for next month? Want to know, and we'd have to decode those and make sure they was correct. And I got to tell you about it, in the process of sending code, or Morse code, if you make a mistake, you have to correct it by putting 8 dits, and then go back and start over. And if you put 7 dits, they had what they call a special radio team that monitored everything that was sent in the area, and they come out with a discrepancy report each month telling you mistakes that you made. That's how vital it was that you did what you had to do right.
So they had oversight that was checking to see what you were doing.
Yeah.
And you were not only sending the code, but you were decoding as well?
Yeah. We had what they call a 109 decoding machine, and they had a courier that brought us is it rating? Excuse me. A courier brought the monthly settings for that 109 machine. You had lug settings. You had to set them according to what he delivered to you, and that was top secret. You couldn't. That was only known between him and you. And you put those in the machine, and when you got through, that come out the code that you wanted. I mean, the 5-letter groups. You had to do that each month for security reasons.
So when you send the message, you're doing the actual Morse code clicking.
Yep.
When you get it back, it's coming through an encrypted machine.
It comes through Morse code. You have to type it out.
Oh, so you have to type it out.
Yeah.
Okay. And is one harder than the other?
I didn't find it that hard when I got onto it.
Did you have a preference, whether it was sending or receiving?
Not really.
Okay.
The first sergeant said I had one of the best wrists of anybody ever seen, rhythm-wise. I don't know why he told me that, but he did.
Are you able to share a memorable message that you had to either decrypt or send that you found to be very interesting?
One, but I don't know whether it's permissible or not. But the sergeants, they had things going back and forth together, and I took one. I thought it was a real pertinent, so I copied it, and it come out clear text. It says, "Lopez, how much booze do you need down there next month?" And I wasn't a drinker, so I didn't think much of that idea. But that's the kind of stuff they got away with, I guess. They shouldn't have done that.
Any messaging as to any important battles that you recall?
Not really. I don't recall any, no.
Yeah, so what were the typical messages? It was supplies and needs and...
Just warning that we sent we had what they called 3-letter groups that told a message in itself, like QRU, INT, meant, I have nothing for you, do you have anything for me? The operator had to decipher that automatically, and he'd send back no, which or whatever. He didn't. And so that was typical, every 30 minutes.
How long were your shifts?
8 hours.
Okay. And what did you do for your off time?
I done a lot of missionary work, I called it. I was pretty much associated with the Japanese children mostly. They were in our back dooryard every day. They went by our house. They were in groups of, sometimes groups of hundreds, all dressed alike, uniforms. One particular day they went to the park, which was nearby. I went over and took moving pictures of, painting pictures of some subject, I don't know just what it was. But they were really, really good artists. They really performed well. And it was good to talk to.
How old were these school children?
Oh, they ranged from, I'd say, first grade up to 8th, 10th. And,
did you run across any type of, whether it would be suspicion or resentment of your presence there as a result of World War II?
you know, you always got that feeling, because you can look at Japanese right in the eye. I shouldn't say this maybe, but you can't read what they're thinking, that's for sure. They don't have expressionists, I'd say. But most of them are very congenial. My houseboy, he was tops. He and I were just like that. We'd go to shows together and on off duty. And we went to this one movie. This is a funny story, so I ought to tell it. We went to this one movie and we were sitting in the balcony, and it was a story about the Japanese version of dropping the bomb on Hiroshima. And of course they had the outlines of what happened afterwards. There's not a building standing, only one. And in the process of watching the film, they had a banister. We sat up in the balcony. I had my feet up on the banister, and George, the houseboy, was sitting next to me. And all of a sudden the screen went dark. And I said, oh gosh, you got that darn guy's camera's gone haywire, we just want to leave. And I got to looking and I could see a silhouette. When darn to be darned, there was a big old wharf rat sitting on the end of my feet. So what did I do? I tried to kick a field goal with him. And he went tumbling straight through the air like that, landed in George's front part like this. He was beating on his chest like that, the rat was running away. And we ran away too. That was the last of that show.
So there was a rat on the banister that was blocking the movie?
It was on my feet.
Oh. Wow. Okay.
That Hakodate was a town just like all Japanese towns. Smell of fish was everywhere. Can I go on with this, or do you want me to keep going? And they used to harvest what they call cuttlefish, baby octopus. And I got pictures of them on their lines, just like clotheslines, all through the town. Miles of clothesline. And they dried them out like that. It was their food source, that and seaweed. Then on top of that, they had what they call open sewerage. I suppose they still have it. But they didn't have sewage systems like we got. We had facilities in the house, but they had cesspools where the old farmer papasons would come by their little honey bucket wagons and dip that stuff out of the sewer into the wagon, take it, put it on their farms. In the process, they raised vegetables. I got pictures of them that you wouldn't believe the enormity of those vegetables, just huge. And we weren't allowed to eat any of them because of bacteria count in them. They told us to stay away from them, especially if they weren't pre-cooked and boiled. So we just we opted not to use them.
And what type of things did you do in your off time besides you call it the missionary work? Like, what did you do?
Well, I just went all over town. Just my buddy and I, we'd pick a day. I got movie pictures of being downtown and walking in abreast with Japanese soldiers, and I did taking pictures of that, just goofing off mostly. But we learned a lot of their culture. I used to go down to the seashore and watch the fishing boats come in. They'd go to Alaska with 50 boats at a time. Of course, I call them boats. They were just little short boats by our standards. But they'd haul those big sharks and everything into for edible food. They unloaded, I don't know how many sharks one day out. Them things looked like they was 20 feet long. And I watched things like that, and I was able to take pictures of it. And I lost them pictures, but there's a lot of things I got pictures of that was really they had the World's Fair there that I went to. It showed about the mechanization that they had versus what we had. Their land was so pliable, the ground was so loose, you could take your arm and stick it up to your elbow and then set without any force. And so in the process, they didn't have any heavy machinery ever on that ground because the farms were such small units, 3 to 5 acres maximum. No fences between, just little trails to get through. And they worked all that by hand. What enormous work ethic those people had. I can't believe what they did. And they were digging potatoes. I got moving pictures of that. Digging potatoes out of a little plot, not more than 5 acres, or even that much. It showed the guy digging the potatoes out with his feet. Instead of a shovel, he was using his feet. He'd go along and you see the potatoes boiling up in front of his feet, and the people were picking them up, and putting them in baskets and dumping them in a common pile. How they ever waged a war like they did, I'll never know. Because they were really in the Stone Age as far as agriculture is concerned. And thrashing the same way. I watched them thrash grain. They they crumble it up like they would, but they put it on a canvas, throw it up in the wind, and let the chaff blow out and let the wheat fall down. They were still doing that. I don't know how they really did it on an enormous scale, but that was the way that I saw it.
What else did you learn about their culture that you remember?
Well, they were very, very, I might say conservative. Very conservative. Nothing was wasted. If you were driving down the road and threw a can out the window, I doubt if it had ever hit the ground before somebody catch it and make a toy out of it. That's how conservative it was. They didn't use paint in any degree. Their houses was exceptionally clean. When you went into their house, you couldn't wear shoes. You had to take your shoes off. And they were very cordial. They ate their meals in a common place. I guess we'd call it a kitchen. But they had a little table. They didn't even sit on chairs. They folded their legs and put their legs under the table. And in the wintertime when it was cold, the way they heated their houses, they called them abachis. They were a portable heater that burned charcoal. And that's how they heated their houses. And their houses, the walls were so thin you could stick your hand through most anywhere. And they were very conservative in that respect. In fact, before I went to my first assignment, I was assigned a duty to go to the dump with a load of garbage from the 1st Cavalry Division. And when I arrived there, I thought I was in the wrong place because there was a city of people right at the dump, all in tents. They were salvaging everything that we'd haul there. Even some of the edibles out of the mess hall, I'm sure. And they had all the tires they turned into what they call clacks. They put on their feet. They didn't waste anything, nothing. And
besides your being stationed in Yokohama, did you go anywhere else?
Hakadani, yeah. Well, that was the last assignment and final one.
And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I was doing fine and operating good until I run into a situation where I took an electric shock off the transmitter. As it's set up, when you open the transmitter, it had a side door on it. And when you opened it, it had a neutral safety switch in it. In other words, the door opened and shut the power off. If the toggle switch, the main switch, failed as you turned it off, you always had that backup. Well, I thought I turned the main switch off. I have no evidence of it. But In any case, when I opened the door, the power was still on because somebody wired over it. I reached in there and got a hold of the tank coil. You had to, well, if I let back up a little bit, you had to change frequencies twice a day when you were on duty for security reasons. So I reached in to get the tank coil to change different tank coils. And then this one I got I estimated, well, up to 4,000 volts radio frequency shock. It was a very low amperage, of course. It would have killed me right off, I'm sure. But anyway, I come out of there with a scar on my where the electricity went in. The next thing I knew, I woke up and drug myself to the door and was hauled off to a Japanese doctor, where he put salve on my wound and turned me loose. From that point on, the next morning they flew me to Sapporo, Japan, to the hospital, where I was at for 30 days. And by the way, I tried to get a claim for the VA, and they turned me down because they had no record of my medical records. They all got burned up in St. Louis. So they said they had no way to issue any help. So, and I don't want anyone to think that I would pursue it in a lawsuit or anything, because I don't think that you don't win anyway. And so I kind of go in opposition to what I've won an award here in the state for, and I just don't want to be a hypocrite. But if they would allow me enough to support my wife after I'm gone, that's all I'd care.
So in your last station, what, were you doing the same type of work?
Yep.
You just switched?
Went right back to work when I got out of the hospital.
All right, and is that the last place where you were based out of?
Akadati.
Akadati. And what was that town like?
What was the town like?
Mm-hmm.
It was, like I said, it had everything a Japanese town's made up of. The smell, the people are all very work-oriented. They knew work backwards and forwards. They could do anything. They could duplicate anything. And I don't blame. I credit the United States for what Japan became. When I first went there, the automobiles were absolutely tin cans. They were nothing. They had three-wheel motorcycles with pickup beds on them. That was their mode of hauling, plus horses and carts. A lot of rickshaws, a lot of bicycles. They had very poor means of transportation. In other words, the trains were good. They were on time, well scheduled. All the facilities like that were good, but they lacked a lot of things in the cities. One outstanding story I forgot to tell you about. I got to watch a Major League Baseball game over there. The New York Giants came over there. I got pictures of them, and played an exhibition game with the Tokyo Giants. And I got pictures all of them. Some of them, Leo DeRocher, and him, and some of them.
Who won?
I'm going to give you a guess, but we Americans won, of course. They just played with them. Yeah.
And you're doing still the same type of work?
Yep.
All right. And is it a smaller town than Yokohama?
No, I finished my job at Akadati. This was prior to Akadati when I seen the baseball game. But yeah, this was prior to that. I started my real duty at Akadati and finished up there.
All right. Did you receive any awards or medals?
Well, I was automatically going to get a sergeant's award if I re-up, but I didn't do that, so no, I didn't.
And did I ask you your rank?
Pardon?
Did I ask you your rank?
Corporal, yeah.
Corporal, okay. And then, so what happened next?
Well, finally got my orders to come home. And we did so by catching another troop ship out of Tokyo.
And how long did it take you to get back home?
14 days.
Oh.
I was in the Navy longer than some of my buddies that was in the Navy. I mean, I was in the, on seas more than some of my buddies.
Did you have any chance to interact with any North Koreans?
Yes, some of them was, I didn't get to know them at all. They were cooks, and the CIA was stationed. They had cooks. The Korean and Japanese didn't get along very good. They were a poor relationship, and that's the only connection I had. I'm trying to think what else was there. But the CIA was unique in itself. They had Nissan boys. They called them Nissan. They were Japanese military people that was in the service, and they were interacting with the in the town with different people just to get a feel of what's going on, knowing what's happening. And so I really admire them for what they did, what they could do. One story I forgot to tell you. I used to go down to had much confidence in them people, and I trusted them so much. I used to go down every month and get a haircut and a shave with a straight razor. And I got pictures of this barber. Anyway, he charged me 25 cents for a shave and a haircut. And then when they got all through, he put hair oil on my hair until I found out what it was. It was bear oil. But I often thought afterwards, you know, those guys could have put you in the gas can and they never know where you went.
And that was an interesting use of oil. What was the problem between the Koreans and the Japanese, do you know?
I don't know. Previously they had wars, I'm sure, between each other. They had, I was just told this. I didn't have any way of verifying it.
And so when did you return to the States? 1954?
Yeah, 54. It was sometime in October, I think I got out. I got all the discharge papers here.
And what did you do when you got back home?
Took over my farm again. My dad tried to run it while I was gone. He was serving as street commissioner, and I had my uncle hired. He was blind in one eye and couldn't see out the other. And he was doing the best he could, but they didn't do too good.
And how big is this farm?
It was an 80-acre farm.
Okay. And all potatoes?
No, it was diversified. It had hay and grain and potatoes.
All right. And how were you welcomed when you returned home?
Oh, I got a chance to go buck spuds. They were just harvesting potatoes, and I got to go out and help do that. That was a real welcome, wasn't it?
You got to go harvest.
Yeah.
Yeah. No rest for you. Okay. So what was your most memorable moment from your involvement in the Korean War?
Well, I got married just prior to going overseas. And we were apart for 18 months, somewhere there, 16 to 18 months. She worked as a nurse at the Sacred Heart Hospital in Idaho Falls, sometimes double shift. We saved at least $1,200 while we were gone. I sent home every cent I got, as much as I could scrape. I sold all my cigarette rations to the houseboy for $1 a carton, and or whatever I could get out of them. Anyway, that was my profit.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably go to jail if they heard about it. I'm willing to go if they want me.
There might be a statute of limitations on that one. So, is there anything you'd like to add that I did not ask?
Well, I think you pretty well covered everything. I'd like to tell you that I've got 2 books that I've written and published, and my number one objective for the books was for my family only. But I've got so much interest in them, and with not sure if the VA is going to qualify for any help, I'd like to be able to sell them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd even donate some to your group if we get something worked out.
Okay.
Put advertisements out. I'd like to see, one guy I'd like to see get a hold of this book in particular is Governor Huckabee.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to get books back to him. I sent one back with my state senator, Crapel, to give to Hannity. I never did hear back from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like there's a message in there for everybody, especially veterans, that we won the wars for them, now we got to win the peace.
Okay. And what is the name of your book?
Patriotism, First Step Towards Unity.
Okay. And what's your second book?
The rest of the story, that's mostly about my ancestry, my father and my grandfather.
All right. And what's the lesson that you're trying to teach in your book about patriotism?
First of all, I'd like to submit that anybody that wants to know about their future should study history. And I call history the GPS of the future. And I'd like people to know that history seems to be second place in school anymore. I have a granddaughter that graduated with high honors, 4-point grade average and plus. And I asked her some of the history questions that I knew by heart. She didn't know what I was talking about. And I think they're kind of putting it on the back burner.
Mm. In that line, is there anything you would like to tell future generations?
To tell what?
Is there anything you'd like to tell future generations? Any advice or lessons or wisdom you'd like to share?
Education, number one. That don't only mean education academically, but physically. Teach them how to work with your hands. Today's world, young people have not the ability to do things with their hands or agile work or common work that most people used to be just everyday occurrence. They don't have that ability anymore. And I blame it mostly on the fact that we've lost all of our small farms where most of our generation and some of the future was taught the work ethic by milking cows. They didn't necessarily look for a paycheck, they looked for a day off. But they worked, and they worked hard. And the Second World War is a good example of that. And that generation that Tom Brokaw said about it, you know Tom Brokaw, he said that generation did the impossible. They didn't know it couldn't be done, so they went ahead and done it anyway. You remember that statement? Mm-hmm. And I think that pretty well says it all for that generation. But if you learn how to work, you can, and learn how to, and academically learn how to be smart, which you go to college for, you've got it made. But if you're unwilling to do one or the other, can't be too sure. Because I had a nephew that graduated from electrical engineering. He put an application into one of the big Lockheed, I guess it was, and he got accepted. And he asked him afterwards, there's several applications, why they chose him. They said, we looked at your background. They said that your dad taught you how to weld, how to paint, how to run a machine shop. He says, if you know how to do that, you can do what we got to do. And he's a very vital form of work. What he does now, it's all top secret. And he told his dad, he says, Dad, he says, I can't tell you what I do, but the government sends us packages, they call them missiles, and we deliver the mail for them to the right address.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
I hope I haven't elaborated too much here.
No, no, very good. Well, Jack, I want to thank you for one, for your service, and two, for sharing the time with me today in your interview.
It's my privilege. I think you're the one that should be thanked. Don't you, Cliff?
Yes, I do. He's putting in a lot of his own time to do all that, and he ought to be proud of what he's doing.
This guy's a veteran too, and he's got a lot of stories. I should. Anyway, I got in this book. I'm going to give these 2 books to you, and if you could get them to where they'll do the most good, do it.
All right.
And there's I got veteran stories from Second World War, First World, well, not First World War, but some about the First World War, but in my war. And
Good.
so,
Excellent.
and some of them are very graphic.
Okay.
One guy, Fred Kopp, went through Dachau. He was on a bulldozer. He ran a tank all the time. He slept under his tank for I don't know how many extended days going through the Battle of the Bulge. And he ended up at Dachau, and he had to bury a lot of the remains there. He said the story tells the story. I won't make that go there, but it's very interesting.
And these stories are from you getting them from your friends?
These are actually stories that they wrote themselves and put in there.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
If you want me to autograph them, I will.